So here's the thing about null steel. It's the hardest substance in the known universe. Period. End of discussion. You could throw a planet at it, and the planet would apologize. The Galactic Council had been bragging about this miracle material for 3 centuries, using it to build everything from warship hulls to that fancy statue of Supreme Chancellor Whoever Cares in the Capitol Plaza. Which made the current situation absolutely hilarious. You know, if you weren't one of the 5,000 sentient beings about to suffocate. Commander Vex stood in the main power corridor of Station Kepler 9, staring at the problem with all 4 of his eyes. A single beam of null steel, roughly 3 meters long, had somehow wedged itself diagonally across the primary power conduit during a routine maintenance accident. Don't ask how. Maintenance accidents are the universe's way of reminding you that Murphy's Law works in every language. 47 hours until life support failure, Vex announced, his mandibles clicking with barely suppressed panic. He was Krathari, a species known for military precision and an obsessive love of protocol. Right now his protocol was screaming at him, and it wasn't helping. Professor Quinn hovered nearby, her gelatinous form rippling with agitation. She was Blorathian, which meant she was technically a sentient blob with a doctorate. 3 doctorates, actually. She never let anyone forget it. "I've run the calculations 17 times, Quinn burbled, her translator giving her voice an unnecessarily pompous tone. "The null steel beam cannot be cut, melted, or phased through. We've tried plasma cutters rated for stellar core temperatures. We've tried molecular disruptors. We even tried asking it nicely." "That last one was your idea," muttered Engineer Tolk from his position by the wall. Tolk was Fenari, a species resembling a 2-meter-tall grasshopper with a pessimistic streak wider than the Andromeda Galaxy. "I told you it wouldn't work. I tell everyone everything won't work. I'm usually right." Vex's eyes swiveled to glare at him. "Your contributions to this crisis have been invaluable, Tolk." Sarcasm detected, filing complaint with HR. The past 48 hours had been a carnival of failure. They'd brought in the Mark 7 quantum separator, which cost more than a small moon and was supposed to be able to phase matter into alternate dimensions. The null steel beam had laughed at it. Well, not literally, but the Mark 7 had exploded, which felt personal. Then came the graviton compressor, the photonic disintegrator, and something called the reality wrench that nobody really understood but cost a fortune to rent. Each piece of equipment met the same fate, absolute failure, followed by expensive repair bills. "Perhaps," Quinn suggested, her form pulsating thoughtfully, "we should simply evacuate the station and accept our loss." "There are irreplaceable research materials here," Vex snapped, "not to mention my complete collection of military medals. We're not abandoning station." That's when the human maintenance crew arrived. Jack Morrison strolled into the corridor with the kind of casual confidence that made Type A personalities want to file incident reports. He was human, average height, with grease stains on his jumpsuit and a coffee mug that read, "I'm not arguing. I'm just explaining why I'm right." He took one look at the jammed null steel beam, took a sip of coffee, and said, "Have you tried prying it out?" The silence that followed could have suffocated a supernova. Quinn spoke first, her voice dripping with academic condescension. "Prying. You want to pry out a beam made of null steel, the hardest substance in existence." "Yeah," Jack said, like he was suggesting they try turning it off and back on again. Vex's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep confusion. "Human Jack, perhaps your translator is malfunctioning. Null steel cannot be bent, flexed, or manipulated by conventional means. We've tried everything." "Did you try a lever?" "A what now?" Jack set down his coffee mug with the careful patience of a kindergarten teacher. "A lever. You know, a rigid bar that pivots on a fulcrum to multiply force. Basic, simple machine. We've been using them since, I don't know, forever?" Tolk's antennae twitched. "That's a primitive concept, pre-industrial. Yeah, and buildings still stand up because of primitive concepts. Funny how that works." Jack pulled out his datapad and sketched a quick diagram. "Look, you put a fulcrum here, use a long lever arm, apply force at this end, and boom. Mechanical advantage. Physics doing the heavy lifting." Professor Quinn actually laughed. It sounded like someone gargling expensive wine. "Young human, I have 17 degrees in applied physics. What you're suggesting violates every principle of null steel's molecular structure. the material's tensile strength alone. Doesn't matter if I'm not trying to break it, Jack interrupted. I'm just trying to move it. Different thing. Vex was scrolling through his datapad now, looking up human history. His eyes widened progressively with each page. Your species used levers to move blocks of stone weighing several tons, for construction, without anti-gravity technology. We also use them to move the entire planet Earth on a philosophical level, but that's more of a metaphor thing. Jack walked around the jammed beam, eyeing it from different angles. Point is, you don't need to break something to move it. You just need the right angle and enough leverage. But null steel is, Quinn began. The hardest material in the universe, yeah, you mentioned that, several times, but here's the thing. Jack grinned, and it was the kind of grin that made bureaucrats nervous. If it's the hardest material in the universe, nothing's going to break it when I use it as a lever against itself, right? Tolk's antennae drooped. He's having a mental breakdown. Stress-induced psychosis. I've seen it before. I'm fine. You're all just overthinking this. Jack headed back toward the maintenance bay. Give me 20 minutes. I need to grab some null steel rods from storage. Vex called after him. Human Jack, we don't have time for experimental failures. Then it's a good thing I'm not experimenting, Jack shouted back. I'm applying 7th grade physics. The three aliens looked at each other, their various appendages conveying a universal message. Humans are insane, and we're all going to die. Jack returned with 2 null steel rods, each about 4 meters long, and what appeared to be a reinforced mounting bracket. He worked with the kind of focused efficiency that came from years of fixing things while other people panicked around him. This won't work, Quinn announced for approximately the 15th time. I've calculated the force required to move that beam. Even with a theoretical lever arm of this length, the human body cannot generate sufficient. Yeah, math says it's impossible, got it. Jack was securing the bracket to the floor plating. Here's the thing about math. It's only impossible if you're doing it wrong. Vex stepped closer, his military training warring with his growing curiosity. Explain your methodology. Gladly. See, your problem is you've been thinking about this wrong. You're trying to break the beam or phase it out or whatever fancy space magic you've got. But the beam's not the problem. It's just wedged. You don't need to destroy a wedge. You need to unwedge it. Jack positioned one of the null steel rods under the jammed beam at a careful angle. The bracket served as his fulcrum point, secured to the most stable section of floor plating he could find. The second rod would act as an extension if he needed more leverage. Tolk was scanning the setup with his equipment. The stress analysis shows that even if this works, the floor plating will give out first. That's why I'm using the reinforced section. You know, the part built to handle heavy equipment. Jack tested the lever's position. Plus, I'm not trying to lift a shuttle. Just shift a stuck beam maybe 10 centimeters. That's all we need. Professor Quinn had her datapad out, formulas scrolling across the screen in frantic succession. The force multiplication factor is... Wait, this is actually... No, this can't be right. The numbers suggest this might actually work, but that would mean... That you've been overcomplicating things for 3 days? Yeah. Jack gripped the lever arm. Stand back. If I'm wrong, nothing happens. If I'm right, you all owe me an apology and probably a raise. And if the floor gives out, Vex asked, then we evacuate and Tolk gets to say I told you so for the rest of his natural life. Ready? Jack braced his feet, gripped the null steel rod with both hands, and pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Quinn started to make a triumphant noise, something between a gurgle and a laugh. Then the jammed beam moved. Just a centimeter. Then 2. Then 5. The screech of null steel against null steel echoed through the corridor, like the universe's most expensive nails on a chalkboard. Jack adjusted his grip, repositioned slightly, and pulled again. The beam slid free. Engineer Tolk fainted. Just straight up collapsed, his grasshopper legs folding as his consciousness checked out of reality. Commander Vex stood frozen, all 4 eyes locked on the now freed power conduit. His mandibles moved, but no sound came out. Professor Quinn dropped her datapad. In 3 centuries of living, she had never dropped anything. Her entire gelatinous form was quivering like she'd been struck by lightning. Jack set down the lever, picked up his coffee mug and took a long sip. So, about that raise. Professor Quinn found her voice first, though it came out as a strangled burble. That's not. How did? What just? Complete sentences, Professor. You've got 17 degrees, remember? She pulled herself together, literally and figuratively, her gelatinous form stabilizing into something resembling composure. Explain, immediately. How did you move an object that cannot be moved using a material that cannot be bent? Jack sighed the sigh of a man who'd had this conversation 1,000 times in 1,000 different contexts. Okay, let me break this down into small words. The beam wasn't bolted down, it was just wedged, which means it had freedom of movement. I didn't bend the null steel. I used one piece of null steel as a rigid lever to apply force against another piece of null steel. The fulcrum distributed the load. Basic mechanical advantage multiplied the force I could apply. The beam moved because physics doesn't care about your feelings. Vex had finally rebooted his brain. He was scrolling through his datapad again, his eyes widening with each swipe. Your species discovered lever mechanics approximately 300,000 years ago. You've been using variations of this principle ever since. Pulleys, wedges, inclined planes, wheel and axle systems. Yeah, we call them simple machines, because they're simple. Jack knelt down to check on Tolk, who was starting to come around. You feeling okay, buddy? I saw the universe end and restart, Tolk mumbled. Everything I know is a lie. Dramatic, but fair. Quinn was pacing now, her form rippling with agitation. This makes no sense. We have graviton manipulators. We have quantum field generators. We have technology that can reshape space-time itself. How did we miss something so fundamental? Because you got too advanced too fast, Jack said, helping Tolk to his feet. Let me guess. Your species discovered anti-gravity what, 500 years after you invented the wheel? 300, Quinn admitted quietly. There it is. You skipped the entire mechanical engineering phase of development. You went straight from fire good to gravity optional without spending 10,000 years moving heavy rocks around with sticks and ropes. Vex was nodding slowly, his military mind piecing together a tactical assessment. Humans remained technologically primitive for an extended period. You had to develop efficient mechanical solutions because you lacked alternatives. We like to call it making do with what you've got. But yeah, basically. Jack started packing up his equipment. Every human kid learns about levers in school because we needed them to build civilization. You folks had energy fields doing the heavy lifting, so you never bothered with the basics. A notification chimed on Vex's communicator. Then another, then 17 more in rapid succession. Oh no, he muttered. What? Jack asked. Word is spreading. Other stations are asking how we fix the null steel problem. The Galactic Engineering Guild wants a full report. 3 universities are requesting your presence for lectures. Vex looked up at Jack with something resembling pity. Human Jack, I'm afraid you're about to become famous. Oh hell no, I just wanted to fix the conduit and get back to cleaning plasma filters. Too late, Tolk said, his antennae perked up and monitoring multiple data streams. You're trending on the galactic network. Hashtag backwards genius. Hashtag humans are terrifying. Hashtag why didn't we think of that? I hate everything about this, Jack said. Professor Quinn had gone quiet, her form still except for occasional ripples of thought. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its condescension. Human Jack, would you be willing to teach us? A course on primitive mechanical solutions? They're not primitive, they're foundational, and sure, I guess, if it keeps more people from dying of stupidity. We prefer the term advancement-induced cognitive oversight, Quinn said. I prefer calling things what they are, but you do you. The lever incident, as it became known, spread through the galaxy faster than a warp-speed gossip chain. Within hours, every major station, ship, and colony had heard some version of the story. By the end of the day, it had been translated into 400 languages, with varying degrees of accuracy. On the Zentari homeworld, High Scholar Mex Tali read the report 3 times, each reading making him more uncomfortable. He called an emergency meeting of the Science Council. So let me understand this correctly. He addressed the assembled scholars, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light in agitated patterns. A human, using a stick, moved an immovable object. Technically, the object was only considered immovable due to our failure to apply appropriate mechanical principles, one scholar offered helpfully. Not helping, the Vorathian collective, a hive mind species that prided itself on problem-solving efficiency, held a 3-hour consensus session to process the implications. Their conclusion? We have been idiots. On the pleasure planet of Nexus 7, a bar full of engineering contractors watched the security footage of Jack's solution on repeat. Nobody said anything for a full 10 minutes. Finally, a grizzled Krathari engineer broke the silence. I once spent 6 months and 3 million credits trying to move a jammed load-bearing beam on the Titan station. Let me guess, his Fenari companion said. Could have used a lever? Could have used a damn lever. They ordered another round and sat in contemplative silence, mourning their wasted budgets. The Galactic Engineering Guild called an emergency session. Guildmaster Thexnor, a being of pure energy who'd been practicing engineering for 7 centuries, addressed the assembly with barely contained frustration. Colleagues, we face a crisis, not of capability, but of perspective. We have apparently become so sophisticated that we've forgotten how to think simply. The human solution was so obvious that none of us considered it. This is unacceptable. The assembly murmured agreement, though several members looked like they wanted to argue and couldn't figure out how. I propose we establish a new position within the guild, Thexnor continued. A human consultation division. Before we attempt any problem with advanced technology, we first ask, what would a human do? The motion passed unanimously, mostly because everyone was too embarrassed to vote against it. Back on Station Kepler 9, Jack's maintenance closet had been raided by alien engineers wanting to see what other primitive tools humans used. They were horrified and fascinated in equal measure by his collection of wrenches, hammers, and something called a crowbar. This is barbaric, one Blorathian engineer burbled, holding up a hammer like it might explode. That's literally just a heavy thing on a stick for hitting other things, Jack explained. It's been working for about 200,000 years. Pretty good track record. Reports started flooding in from across the galaxy. A jammed airlock on Station Aurora that had stumped engineers for weeks. Fixed with a wedge. A cargo container that wouldn't open despite multiple quantum lock bypasses. Someone pushed instead of pulled. An entire wing of a research station that lost artificial gravity. A human pointed out they'd plugged the graviton generator into the wrong port. Commander Vex compiled a list. By the end of the week, humans had solved 47 impossible problems using what they called common sense, and what the rest of the galaxy was starting to call humans being weirdly good at obvious things we somehow missed. Professor Quinn was 3 days into writing her thesis, tentatively titled How We Got Too Smart for Our Own Good. A comprehensive analysis of advancement-induced stupidity. She'd already filled 200 pages and was only on the introduction. Tolk had started a support group for engineers who'd had their worldviews shattered by simple solutions. It met twice a week. Attendance was climbing. 3 months later, Jack Morrison sat in what had once been his maintenance closet and was now, according to the unnecessarily official plaque on the door, the Human Consultation Office for Fundamental Problem Resolution. He'd tried to get them to change it. They'd refused. Apparently, the Galactic Council had approved the wording, which meant it was set in stone. Or null steel. Whatever. The office hadn't changed much. Same desk, same chair, same coffee maker that he'd brought from Earth because alien coffee tasted like battery acid mixed with regret. The only difference was the constant stream of aliens showing up with impossible problems. Today's crisis involved a cooling system that wouldn't activate despite passing every diagnostic test. The Fenari engineer explaining it looked like he was about to cry. And you've tried turning it off and on again, Jack asked. Yes, multiple times. Did you check if something's blocking the intake vent? The intake vent is clear. We've scanned it 17 times. Did you look at it with your actual eyes? Pause. With my eyes? Yeah, just walk over and look. 20 minutes later, the engineer returned looking sheepish. There was a cleaning rag stuck in the secondary intake, behind the primary vent. We didn't scan that far. Happens to everyone. That'll be 1 standard credit for the consultation. The engineer paid and left, muttering about how humans were either geniuses or the universe's cruelest joke. Commander Vex had changed. He now carried a small notebook filled with human proverbs and problem-solving principles. His current favorites included, Keep it simple, stupid, and if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. He'd also started reading human history and had made it as far as the Bronze Age before having to take a break. Learning that humans had fought wars with pointy sticks while his ancestors were developing faster-than-light communication had triggered an existential crisis that required therapy. "Human Jack," Vex said, appearing in the doorway. "We have a situation." "Why do you people keep having situations? It's been 3 months. How do you have this many problems?" "We've always had these problems. You've just made us aware of how many we were solving inefficiently." Vex gestured for Jack to follow. "This one involves a door." They arrived at the station's main conference room, where a crowd of aliens had gathered around the entrance. The door, a massive reinforced portal designed to withstand explosive decompression, was apparently stuck. Professor Quinn was there, running scans. "The mechanism shows no malfunctions. The hydraulics are functioning normally. The door simply refuses to open." "We've tried override codes," a Zentari technician added. "We've tried rerouting power. We've tried the emergency release. Nothing works." Jack walked up to the door and studied it for exactly 3 seconds. Then he grabbed the handle and pushed. The door didn't budge. He stepped back, looked at the sign next to the door, and started laughing. "What?" Vex demanded. "What's funny about a critical access failure?" Jack pointed at the sign. "You've all been pushing. The sign says pull." The silence was deafening. Jack gripped the handle and pulled. The door swung open smoothly, its hydraulics purring like they'd never had a problem in their life. "It's a pull door," Jack said, his voice dripping with the kind of patience usually reserved for small children and very confused puppies. "You were pushing a pull door. For how long?" 4 hours, someone admitted quietly. 4 hours. Jack turned to face the assembled crowd of the galaxy's supposedly brightest minds. "You're all highly educated, technologically advanced, and apparently capable of forgetting how doors work. Sometimes the universe isn't complicated. Sometimes you're just idiots." He walked away, leaving behind a group of aliens who were collectively reconsidering every decision that had led them to this moment. Back in his office, Jack poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and updated his consultation log. Fixed door. Problem was stupidity. Charge double. His communicator chimed. Another station with an impossible problem. Something about a load-bearing wall that couldn't support weight despite being structurally sound. Jack sighed, finished his coffee, and grabbed his toolkit. Somewhere in the galaxy, someone needed to be told they'd installed something upside down. It was a living. And honestly, watching aliens have existential crises about basic physics never got old. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the most advanced solution is knowing when you don't need one. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is ask the guy who still knows how to use a hammer. They just wished that guy would stop being so smug about it. But hey, you earn your smugness when you save 5,000 lives with 7th grade physics. That's just math.